Hey friends, welcome back to The Wild Photographer. I've got an episode today that I enjoy all these episodes, but I really love connecting to a longtime buddy of mine, Eric Rock. He's such an icon in the industry. He has really, in a lot of ways, pioneered our collective ability to be photo guides and professional photographers. And he's also probably one of the most well-traveled photo guides and just general guides and or photographers that I know. Like he's probably traveled to twice as many countries and led twice as many expeditions, photo expeditions that is, than the runner-up, whoever that might be. So incredible breadth of knowledge here. We cover a lot, including practical tips for how to metaphorically walk up on the wildlife subject that you are photographing. We talk about how to use the histogram for great exposures. We talk about ethical wildlife photography, his techniques for editing and processing, and quite a deep dive into his own personal photo gear. There's so much else that we cover in today's conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think you're going to really love what we have in store for you today. Before I welcome Eric, I wanted to do a shout out to one of our lead sponsors of the podcast. So, first up, it's MPB. And I want to talk about something that pretty much every photographer either deals with or is, like me, kind of obsessed with: the need to get new photo gear, whether it's new technology, whether it's just a wish list item. And MPB makes it incredibly simple to buy, sell, or trade used camera gear. It's all in one place, all one platform, without any sort of uncertainty that comes with these random online marketplaces where you don't know the person. If you're selling it, you don't know the quality exactly of what you're buying. When you buy from MPB, every single item is carefully inspected. It's tested to very rigorous professional standards. It's photographed so you can see exactly what you're getting online. And you just really, again, know what you're getting. There's no surprises. Plus, everything comes with a warranty and you can do hassle-free returns if need be. And this is a really big deal when you're like myself or like Eric, where you rely on these tools as a professional photographer. On the flip side, if you've got equipment that is just sitting around collecting dust, you need to replace things or upgrade, MPB is wonderful to sell to. It's very, very simple. You get a quote fast, like instantaneous on their website. They handle the shipping, which is also insured. And once your gear is checked, you get paid directly. There's no awkward meetups, there's no back and forth messages. So whether you're upgrading or just making room for new gear in your kit for your next adventure, whether that's to Africa for a proper wildlife safari or just on one of your photo walks, MPB makes the whole process feel really, really simple, very easy, and probably most importantly, very professional and certain. So check them out at mpb.com. And now let's go ahead and get into the episode and talk with Eric. Eric, welcome to the Wild Photographer. Thanks so much for joining.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks. Good to see you again.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming, but so thrilled to have you on and talk with you about all your adventures and exploits around the world. To start off, you one of the real superlatives about Eric Rock. I mean, there are of course many that we'll touch on today, but one of the big ones is honestly you are probably one of the more not one of you are probably the most well traveled photographer, wildlife, nature, landscape photographer that I know in terms of how many places you've been around the world. And I say that not lightly, like you probably have done twice as much as the second in line of anybody I know. And that's obviously saying something. What is your favorite place to photograph on planet Earth?
It's funny, but I get asked that question a lot, usually when I'm out, leading a photo tour somewhere or a nature tour somewhere. And I've got to fall back on, how I started things, but I'm a pretty here and now kind of guy. So I'd have to say, when I get asked that question, I say, wherever I'm at, I'm a here and now kind of guy. And I figure
Good answer.
if I'm there, it's for a good reason. And if for some reason I'm not enjoying it, I probably shouldn't be there. I shouldn't be there photographing. I probably shouldn't be there leading that particular photo safari. And so I'm a here and now kind of guy. So whether it's, on a safari in Africa or leading a trip into the Arctic or maybe, even just a photo walk around my neighborhood, I try to be in here and now and really enjoy and squeeze the juice out of that. So that's my standard answer. And I'd have to say overall, it's true. Now, I might say if somebody pushed me a little bit more, well, where do you feel the most comfortable? I'd have to say probably the Arctic in some way because of my background in Alaska, living there for 20 years, exploring, leading trips, working in a wildlife research area. it led me to a lot of places where even Alaskans who lived there all their life wouldn't have a chance to go. So, and then from there, Arctic Canada, uh, you Greenland, another good location to spend time, and Svalbard as well. So those are all pretty amazing places.
It's a tough, borderline unfair question to ask right off the bat. I also am asked that a lot. I'm like, oh gosh, can I give you a top three or a top 10? So yeah, thanks for playing along with me there. But I'm gonna do a follow up, which is probably equally as hard, but a little bit more distilled. What
That's
about
okay.
what about
I didn't find it
favorite?
a hard answer. I didn't find it a hard question to answer. I found it,
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
good.
a good chance to kind of refocus a little bit.
Yeah, and it is funny, whenever I answer that question again, when I'm guiding photo trips or just out traveling anywhere, it's like, well, favorite for what? Is it to photograph landscapes? Is it to photograph wildlife? Is it just to be? Is it a place I could see myself living? So yeah, I know there's a lot of different things that go through my mind, but yeah, I'm gonna kind of take away from that the Arctic. I know you have deep roots in Alaska, and that obviously counts for that region. And then yeah, think about Svalbard and I don't. I guess that's a good seed for the next question. Is okay. So place aside, favorite critter. What's like photographically, of course, favorite critter, favorite animal, and maybe it's not an animal, but what's your favorite thing to photograph out
Uh,
there?
you know, like many photographers, nor wildlife photographers, I'd have to say bears, and whether it be brown bears or what most of us know as grizzly bears or polar bears, even black bears, you know, um, and I want to say that for a different reason. I probably learned more about nature from spending time with bears, again, from brown bears to, moving on to polar bears eventually. Uh, by learning what they're about, how they interface with the environment, I learned more about nature from those two teachers than anybody else. I studied river otters for two summers in Alaska, really um, in-depth studies, doing some techniques, using some techniques that had never been used before, allowed us some really incredible windows into their world, but it was nowhere near dynamic. Learned a lot, but nowhere near dynamic as spending time photographing, watching bears. So, and it doesn't matter what kind of bear, just they interface with their world in such an intimate way that they're probably the best teachers when it comes to learning about nature.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you there. Bears, I mean, we've got what 8 species in the world we can pick from, and they're all quite different, very different
Mm.
regions. You've got some that live on or very near the equator, whether it's the Andean spectacled bear or Bornean sun bear. You've got others that live in the, basically polar opposite, pun intended, in the polar region, up in the Arctic with polar bears. Um, if we're to think generally, and this is a very loaded question, but how do you walk up on photographing bears? And you might need to pick a single species or even a place, but like what's going through your mind when you want to photograph that animal? I think, for myself, I'm very opportunistic. Whatever the conditions are, whatever the lighting is, like I'm making the best of it. And of course, I'm using certain settings. I might want to shallow depth the field. If it's a portrait shot, I might want to deep depth the field for a wildlife in landscape shot. But what's kind of going through your mind as you are, walking around in grizzly country and you see mothers and cubs, or you're out in the tundra and photographing polar bears? Are there any lessons, kind of generalities that you can impart on listeners of what to think about, how to set up your shot for the most success?
Mm. First, I'd take even half a step back from that, and I would say anybody looking to do that, and myself included, I would go with a very well trained, reputable, insightful guide for that area. Um, when I was leading the trips, I was that person, and so I wasn't photographing. I was watching what was going on. I was, checking the six to make sure everything's fine there, and not so much for, out of respect for the bear, out of respect for the animal, out of respect for my subject. The last thing I'd want to do is, get into a place where I was compromised or my subject was compromised. So, going with somebody who's going to be there to help guide you, to help keep an eye on what's going on around, to anticipate those behaviors, because when you're looking through the lens, you're seeing a small little window, which is what you want to do when you're a photographer. You want to concentrate on is that going to be a portrait? Is it going to be a landscape shot with a bear in it? Is it going to be an action shot? And by going with that guide, and this is a big plug for the good guides that are out there, okay? They're the ones that are watching. They're going to tell you, okay, be ready. This we got a good potential for this behavior to happen, and then hopefully, pow, there it happens for them. So that would be the first place I would start. For myself, again, I tend to go just because I want somebody with a broader view at the time. I'll go with another one of these guides, and I'll might trade off and say, hey, you shoot for a while. I'll kind of keep an eye on things and kind of see what's going on around you and help you out. And so taking times passing the baton for who's guiding at that time so the other one can concentrate on really get into their photography, because that's what I like most about wildlife photography, is to really kind of make that connection through my lens, to be there for when the action happens or for when the light changes. And I don't want to be distracted by other things. So a guide or somebody watching everybody that I can trust is going to be the key. And I really suggest that for anybody thinking to work with bears, because they are large animals. They deserve a lot of respect.
And what about like the average lens choice, the average camera settings? We're going to get into a little bit more of a gear section later on per the norm, but yeah,
Cool.
just for someone starting out that might not really know, well, should I be shooting with a wide angle? Should I be shooting with a telephoto? Like what are some of the go-to settings? Do you have any tricks with, all the aperture, shutter speed, ISO stuff, or is it all pretty standard?
Oh, it's well for me. It's pretty standard. I'm a run and gunner, if you can imagine. I like to keep things pretty much simple on the camera so I can concentrate on the moment. And you know, the lens choice, almost always I'm going to be working with at least a 300 millimeter lens, or something with that kind of perspective. Maybe 200, mainly because I want to give whatever my subject is, and if we're talking about bears, I want to give them the respect of some distance, because they need to make a living, and the less I'm in the way, the better. Now, there are times where, it's okay. You might be closer and you're shooting closer, and, that's the time for the real tight, close up of the head. And I love portraits. I love wildlife portraits. So I'm not afraid to use that long lens to get that. But then again, I might kind of reach around behind me, pull up another camera with a wide angle and get that landscape shot and show that wider perspective. And that's wonderful. But I tend to, with wildlife, if I were to say I have a walk around lens on, a run and gun theme, it's probably going to be at least 200 millimeters, probably closer to 300 millimeters or more. And with the gear I shoot, that's pretty easy to do. And I use that on my daily photo walks. So, I'm not always walking with bears. I've got black bears in my yard here in the summertime, and I have the potential to run into them here in the neighborhood when I'm doing my photo walks. But, around Alaska, same thing. Or, if I'm in, a remote area of Canada, I'll be pretty much following the same guidelines.
And I know you shot with a few different camera systems over the years, but what are your thoughts for wildlife photography with comparing primes, which would be those fixed focal length lenses where you can't zoom in and out, versus a telephoto zoom where you have that flexibility? Do you gravitate to one or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I love primes. I will tell you that. That was kind of my um, era for lenses, where if you were shooting at a professional level, you had to be shooting a prime. It wasn't till, the pro 70 to 200 2.8 zooms came out that all of a sudden zooms started getting some real notice. Now, there is a couple exceptions to that, but I don't want to go into the history. But it was really, for me, the 70 to 200s became good pro level lenses. And those are the 2.8 pro level for sure. So, but nowadays, I mean, it's a great time to be a wildlife, a nature photographer, because um, the zooms are just so much better. And I mean, they're much more versatile, and you can actually travel lighter with less gear. I would love to take a big bag full of primes, but I'm not that young anymore. And, it saves me time switching. I want, just that moving and constantly shooting or looking for subjects. I don't want to be switching lenses when the action happens. So zooms are definitely a way to go. And again, the technology nowadays, since let's go back, I won't go back too far because then it starts, kind of, it gives you an idea of my age. But let's go back to the 90s. There weren't that many zooms that, you could go out and produce the same level of images you do today. So between digital cameras and the zooms we have, it's a much better time to be a nature photographer.
So this is a bit of a selfish question because I'm thinking about renting a lens for an upcoming trip. What are your thoughts on like the 300 2.8 class versus the 400 2.8? And for those that are not familiar with the difference in those, obviously one gives you more reach. They're the same aperture, but the 400 is like a bazooka. It's gigantic.
Ooh, a lot of
And I'm
glass, a lot of weight.
yeah, I mean it's a different class in a way, and then they're both very, very sharp. I wouldn't say one's necessarily sharper than the other. We could probably go online and look at some lens tests, but um like would you ever choose the 300 for wildlife routinely because of the risk of being too far in, being, too I don't want to say zoomed in because these are primes, but
Yeah.
like that's one of my big concerns 'cause I don't shoot on big primes, but again, with the ability to rent lenses so affordably these days, I'm thinking and just kind of wondering like, am I going to regret having this bazooka that is too far in on my animal where I can't get those landscape shots, or is the 300 going to not just not quite be enough to get that portrait shot?
Oh, I would say weight-wise, if there's a weight concern, the 400 2.8 is gonna be more detrimental. The 300 2.8 is gonna be more versatile, especially if you're using you're taking a set of converters with you. I think you just have a lot more flexibility. I used to do it for safari all the time. I can remember traveling around Africa for 2 months with a 300 2.8 in my bag and a set of converters, which was this is a long time ago, film days. After I came back from that particular trip, I put that lens away and was like, "I'm not touching you for a while." I mean, that was a good bit to lug even back then. So 400 2.8 is great. I mean, it's also versatile, but not quite as versatile as 300 2.8. If you're going for more bird life, I would say the 400. If it's more mammals, I'd lean more towards the 300. I just love the perspective of 300 millimeters also, plus that out of focus background works really nicely for if you're in close and you're doing portraits. It's just a beautifully sharp, most of them are beautifully sharp lenses. I'm not sure which um, brand we're talking about or system we're talking about, but I think both Nikon, Canon, any other manufacturers at 300 2.8, it's going to be a very well researched and built lens, and it's going to give you the sharpness you need.
Well, Canon just came out with, I don't know how much you follow Canon these days, but they just came out with one of their primo, tip top big prime lenses of a 300 2.8 that's not a prime. It's a 100 to 300 2.8
I
at that
saw that.
tip top quality. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this the best of all worlds? But I'm shooting with 100 to 500 right now, which I love and hate at the same time because it's like f7.1 at 500. And it's like,
Hmm.
I don't like that at all.
Yeah, it's
But thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, 1 to 300, as sharp as the tip top primo, best of all class kind of thing. But am I going to be really bummed having to shoot at 420 f4 or just not being able to have that same distance? And again, selfish question because I'm truly thinking about this for my
yeah.
upcoming trips, but it's tempting.
I would rent that. You know what I'd do is I'd rent um,
Hmm.
that new Canon lens. That's what I would go with. And I
Yeah.
suggest that to a lot of people if they're not sure about a lens and it's a trip that, it's a very specialized trip. Sometimes that's the way to go. I should be careful, what I say there because I don't want to, cut off my nose to spite my face. But, uh, you know, I represent a brand, but at the same time, if you check it out on a rental, and I've had people do this, they come on a trip, they say, well, that's a kind of expensive lens for one trip. They rent it and then they go back and buy it, which is
Mm-hmm.
perfectly fine. It gives you a chance to try it out and, goal to shoot for, which
Mm-hmm.
a lot of good photography is about setting goals and whether that's in gear, but also in, what you're out there capturing.
Ooh,
So,
tell me more about that. Setting goals in photography.
oh, um, I always said, I have my annual goals, of course. You can start at any level with goals. It could be everyday goals. Like for me, I have a goal every day to get, if I'm not out photographing or leading a photo tour, and it's not part of what I'm supposed to be doing that day, excuse me, is I try to do a photo walk. It may only be around the block if I'm limited on time because I'm online or meetings or working on other projects, or maybe my wife's got me doing something here at the house. I try to get out for at least a little bit. Other times it might be 3 to 5 miles, and sometimes it becomes more of a walk where I just kind of zone out and it gives me a chance to reflect a little bit. But from that photo walk, I get some exercise. I get out of the house. I get a chance to work with gear. So we can always go down that road anytime you want to, but just a chance for me to keep active in photography. And whether I live in a pretty decent place, but for people who maybe live in a city, hey, walk around the local park. Maybe the nearest state park. Get out every now and then, do a photo walk. It keeps you shooting. I also have bigger goals, and they tend to go more. Most of them tend to go more annual. For instance, during COVID, was living on a little island out in Puget Sound, and it was a nice place to be. Kind of not a whole lot of people, and so, but at the same time, pretty sequestered away. So my photo walks every day were good, but I made my yearly goal to get out and you know what. I've got plenty of birds here. I'm going to try to photograph every single species of bird on the island and become a better bird photographer. Not just get the shot, but force myself to get the shot and get a better one each time. So for this year, I'm gonna plan on spending more time eye level with waterfowl. I don't know if you've watched any of my stuff, but lately I've been working from floating hides in local ponds and lakes here in Montana, and especially in the springtime. That May, early June time is great because they're all arriving, they're looking good, and they're getting ready to head north. So I want to spend more time in that water. And trust me, it gets May here in these high mountain lakes pretty cold, so I can usually spend maybe 2 hours at a time in the water before I have to crawl out and kind of shiver for a while. So, each year I put together a different mesh of goals for myself and kind of work on those. And sometimes they're species oriented, sometimes they're activity oriented, or just, what kind of things I want to get, maybe reading behavior or, um, you know, different backgrounds. So, and maybe I might even go out each day with a different goal on my photo walk. So it's all possible.
Do you ever set goals for individual trips that you might be guiding or joining?
Yeah, when I have time. It depends on the particular trip and the particular group. Sometimes I have time to do that, and I usually know if I've done a trip enough. I usually have a pretty good idea of what that goal could be. Say from I just got my last trip was a bird photography tour in Costa Rica, and my personal goal was if I had time between shoots, which often we do, we come back for lunch, have a little bit of downtime, charge batteries, sneak off with my macro lens, chase things like leafcutter ants, or, scorpions, any kind of cool little thing like that. So it's just a little break from my work to go enjoy a different aspect of the photography.
I love that. Goal setting in photography. So we've sort of alluded to this, but you lead some of the most epic nature and wildlife adventures around the world to areas that are honestly coveted by every photographer out there. How did you get into it, and what advice do you have for those that wish to follow in your footsteps, perhaps?
Okay. Oh, yeah. I'd say I think with anything you do, you should do this for passion. If this the photo tour side, it's a mix of your toolkit. You've got different tools you need to bring to the game. You can't just be a good photographer. If you're going to be a photo tour leader, you have to be an incredible people person. Something I'm constantly working on. You can always, and it's kind of a game that changes under your feet. So you've constantly always got to be adjusting for being that people person that takes that experience and makes it what each person needed. And back when I first started doing photo tours, they were really designed for professional photographers that wanted to increase their portfolio with different animal photos or landscapes or different types of photos to bring into it to make them more marketable and sell more images. It's not like that anymore. It's a much better place to be a photographer, nature photographer, because you're not, if hey, congratulations if you're making a living as a wildlife photographer. There aren't that many people out there doing it. But I would say it's not a great time to be a wildlife photographer because it's a real hard market to make sales in. Now, enter competitions, all that stuff, have fun with that. I don't want it to but it's a great time to be a nature photographer because of the gear, because of the trips have been finessed, and you can go to these amazing places because of all these tours that are out there. Um, I would say, you know, this toolkit that you develop is going to really be something that you're going to constantly add new tools, maybe put some of those old tools away for a while until maybe you need them again. But it's really about being a people person. So develop that side. while you're developing as a photographer. And all that should be your passion. If that's not your passion, you might have some fun for a while, you might burn out, you might not make it too long, but really work on that passion and working with people. Because if one of my favorite things to do is to see when one of my guests gets that shot, I've helped them get that shot that they're just completely blown away from. I don't have it, but they have it. Hey, that's even more valuable to me as a photo tour leader. And on a personal level, if you want to grow as a photographer and learn how to communicate this stuff, I really something we forget about is find a sense of place. I've been lucky enough to say Denali National Park was my sense of place for the longest time. And still when I go back, I can step on the ground and get a feel for what's going on. So, find a sense of place and really see what is all possible within that small little microcosm that you've created for yourself. And it might be a little park in your neighborhood. It could be a great national park somewhere in the high Arctic. But for the most part, if you can find how those intricacies all come together, that's going to be a very good background for when you go to a new location. That's going to be your kind of your foundation. So, if a sense of place can be a foundation for you to take other places, if I could say it in just a couple of words.
Yeah, digging deep. I think that's a really good bit of advice, and I think the photo walks you're talking about, it's a great way to do that. When I heard you say that, I was thinking back to a conversation that I had the other day with someone asking, well, how did I learn photography, or how does one learn photography? And probably the simplest, quickest answer is practice, practice, practice.
Mhm.
And, even if you're doing street photography in your town that has little to nothing to do with nature, it's going to make you a better nature photographer because you're going to learn your camera better. You're going to learn what this setting does versus this setting. You're going to experiment with white balance maybe or slow shutter speeds, and that will translate into the field. But I think the other part of it is, doing the same walk 5 days in a row or 10 days in a row and seeing how the light changes at different times of day, or you see that little mushroom that just sprouted in the grass next to the sidewalk, and you start to be able to look deeper into the landscape, which I think is really, really important if you're doing a photo trip. You have 2 weeks on the ground. You need to be able to capture all the big, showy, awesome stuff that you wanted and hoped for and expected, but also to do yourself a service and do photography service, you got to go a little bit deeper too and photograph it in ways that people may not have seen it before, or take photographs that aren't out there in hordes on the internet. So yeah, I really like that advice. I often think about being useful in photography, and more specifically having my resulting photographs be useful. And there are many ways you can take that, and there are many ways they can be useful. I think a lot of us just, that we want them to be useful for ourselves. We want to take beautiful
Mhm.
photographs that we're proud of, that we can kind of showcase and show off, and maybe print off and put in our home or our office. Um, but I notice with a lot of your photography, you're an excellent travel photographer, and this is another way to be very useful, where your photographs might make it into brochures or travel catalogs or other media like that, where yeah, this may not be something that I put over the sofa in my living room, but it shows this really interesting story about the trip that you're planning, or about the region that you are helping protect, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And specifically, my question is, what ingredients do you think make for compelling travel photos? Travel photos that might be used in more of a marketing sense, not necessarily a big, showy, awesome, I guess climactic type photo for a wall or the cover of Nat Geo, but something that's useful in marketing.
By the way, thanks for noticing that. That's important to me. My background, my university education was in photojournalism. So that's a nice, and I'm still pulled that way. I'm pretty eclectic in my photography. So, what most people tend to see on social media is my nature wildlife stuff, but I do put those in there, and those are very important for me. On a personal note, I think what really makes it's actually pretty simple. I think to get to your question, the answer should be pretty simple. I think really what you want to do is present images where people see themselves in that. whether it's, up against, they're standing looking up at a really nice waterfall to, maybe and I've seen you do this too, from a safari vehicle back behind them while this incredible scene is developing in front of them. And, you're photographing them totally immersed in the experience. And I think no, you don't need faces, but, we all want to put ourselves in that scene, say, oh, if that was me, I would be shooting it this way. I'd be looking for that movement, or I'd wait for that moment when that, lion pounces or whatever it is. So I think really that's it. Creating an image where people want to put themselves in it. I did this just last year. My wife and I were in Zimbabwe. We spent a couple nights in Zimbabwe on our way through to Zambia, and of course we go spend some time at Victoria Falls, and standing there, and so working some video with her in it, and the waterfalls, all that movement, and just the appreciation of place. And so for me, giving somebody to focus on, and your viewer putting themselves into the scene. How can they do that?
Yeah, excellent. And I realize not everyone out there has, access to submitting photos to a travel company like we might, since we're deeply immersed in that world. But oftentimes, putting people in those photos and getting that picture yourself here, I'm doing air quotes now, picture yourself here type shot actually is a really good photo for your own personal album, for your portfolio, for your slideshow, for when you show friends and family coming back home. I think people often knee jerk to the idea that when that safari vehicle from another group pulls in front of the sighting, you say, oh no, like they ruined the shot. But the reality is, I think that's one of the best foreground elements, best storytelling elements. Like those always make it into my final album, just on a personal level. Like when I want to look back on photos and reminisce, because it puts yourself back in that moment. When it's this perfect clear shot of a cheetah on the Serengeti, like cool, you can count the whiskers on its cheek. That's great. And it's all tack sharp and perfect. But sometimes when you can see a person, another photographer, or just more of like a wide angle shot of like, what did this actually look like when I was there? Those are really, really great memory making tools. And if you do have access to companies that might want your media, of course, there's always stock photography. There's always just contacting these companies with your photos and seeing if they want them. A lot of times they will.
Hmm.
It's a really, really good skill to hone. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I know that most companies don't get enough of that type of shot. That's what they're just digging for. They really dig that stuff.
Very true. Very true. So, on a similar note, and I'm kind of calling back to a previous answer you discussed. What is it? What do you think it takes to be successful with photography? And I would say, especially nature photography, which encompasses the travel, like we just talked about, but also landscapes and wildlife. It's hard to be a dedicated wildlife photographer and go to countless art shows throughout the year or rely solely on website sales. You can make some scratch for sure,
Hmm.
but to
Hmm.
be professional where that is paying your rent and your electricity bill, it's getting increasingly more difficult. So what do you think it does take to be successful with photography in today's day and age? And do you think it's changed over the years and where might it be going if we're on a trajectory into the future?
Oh boy, you know, great question. I don't know if I can answer all of that, especially where's it going. So it depends. I think the success depends on which avenue you go, because there are new avenues like influencers. Um, Good or bad, whether you like it or not, right now, that's a place, that's a place to be as a photographer, a nature photographer as well. So that's a good place. Now, let's go to kind of the first kind of part of the question as, selling images, whether it be what little bit of stock industry there is nowadays versus, gallery sales. I think the first thing to be doing this to make those images that stand out that people are going to want to buy is patience. That in all aspects of nature photography and most photography, especially, but nature photography is patience. That's the only way you're going to get those images. You just don't drive up or hike up and take that picture. You do some research, you spend some time getting to know it, maybe hire a guide that knows a little bit more about the area, or just put in the time. So whether that's a landscape or a wildlife shot, it's going to require patience and time. Now, finding your vision, uh, you know, that becomes a little bit more nebulous because sometimes, it can be maybe you're really. interested in the small creatures in our world, macro photography, incredible place to be. And it's actually a great place. Once you become good at it, there are fewer people out there making that kind of living. And there's actually a fairly good sized market for it because, there's publications, there's ongoing research and books and places where that stuff can go, plus new discoveries to be made through macro photography. So you find your genre where you really feel comfortable, and, like, let's go back to what I said earlier, put your passion into it, and that's really gonna show up. I'm lucky enough, I work with a couple of photographers at OM Systems that have really done an incredible job of that. When I think about who should I be looking at for macro photography, I go right there because these people have an amazing passion for what they're doing. And I think by showing that patience and pouring your time into it, developing your genre, that passion comes out, and that's what people are drawn to. So, there's also, if you can make a little bit of scratch as a maybe an educator as well, if you have those skills. If people realize, wow, this person is doing some amazing work, I'd really like to learn their technique. Well, they put on a workshop for you or some one-on-one education. Not everybody's a good educator. That's something to keep in mind. Some people may be great photographers, and when it comes down to sharing their experience, they may not want to, or they may not be very good at it. So you have to be very careful about that too. Hopefully it's not too much trial and error. Hopefully you have good resources, and with the internet nowadays, you can usually find out something about people beforehand, and how good of educator they are, or maybe how much further they're going to take you into your passion. So I don't know if I answered all that, especially where it's going in the future. Honestly, I can't tell. Most people just throw up their hands and say AI, which is quite possible. But, I think what I usually tell people is photograph for yourself first. If you're judging yourself from your photography and you're using that to educate yourself, make yourself better, then there's a success in there it's not necessarily a monetary success, but it can fuel almost everything else you do. So shoot for yourself first. If you're ever going to say success for me is when I come home and I feel good about that experience and that maybe even had a couple of photos from it. So that's my cop out answer. Shoot for yourself.
No, no, I love it, and that was a complete answer, all good. So, I can't even imagine how many photo trips you've guided over the years. I mean, it's gotta be in the many hundreds, if not probably thousands realistically, and my question is, we often get quite a spectrum of photographic experience and prowess in our trip participants. But oftentimes folks are, I would say, maybe the middle of the bell curve, at least for me, is kind of in like the serious hobbyist. They'll go on a small handful of trips every year. They take fantastic photos. But are there any commonalities of lessons that you teach kind of early on in the trip to that type of person? And I don't want to say necessarily beginner, like definitely not the first time picking up a camera, but someone that is pretty passionate, pretty serious. They want to do it. They're not professional. They may be in their retirement career, or they may just be doing this as as we're talking about here, as just something to be very fulfilling on a hobbyist kind of level. Are there any lessons that you find are some of the most important or most well received? And I'm just going to use an example, not to seed the answer too much, but things like compositional elements or ways that you see lighting or framing, that kind of stuff. Like things are people say, "Oh yeah, I remember I learned that back in the day, but this is a great refresher." Are there
Mhm.
any things you start off your photo trips, which are really in a way multi-day photo
Mhm.
workshops and multi-day photo lessons, so those early on lessons that you find for that cohort of individuals where they really take something away and can instantly improve from those lessons?
Oh, absolutely. And you don't underestimate the power of just good basic going over the basics, whether it's talking about, what files are you using? Are you shooting RAW? Are you shooting JPEG? Go over the basics of that, go over the basics of handling those files, on through to, different settings, whether it be in making it what a good good exposure is, reading I love talking to people about, reading a histogram. I think it's still one of the most important tools in a digital camera, something we didn't have back in the film days. Oh man, if I'd had that in the film days, I'd been a much better photographer much earlier on. So covering those basics right off the bat, just to make sure everybody's on the same page or up to has a chance to be on the same level there. And then I go into it. And I think one of the most important things is um, fieldcraft. And I work with another gentleman off and on, another ambassador for OM Systems, Lee Hoy. Great guy. And we talk about fieldcraft and how important that is into photography. And one of my things early on is, where does your eye go? Where does your eye go in a scene? How are you going to complement that? Do you add more to it? Do you subtract? So whether it's and a lot of times that's landscape where you have the time to really walk through it step by step. But the same thing applies in wildlife and more fleeting types of photography like that. But concentrate on where your eye goes. And if you're doing landscapes, you can easily bring that over and you'll be a little bit more natural when it comes to wildlife or things that tend to move and are more fleeting. So I think there are certain things that are easier to teach and go over on landscape trips. And then in wildlife, it's more about seeking out, where's the action going to occur? How's it going to occur? What settings do you need to capture that? So, those are really the kind of, you got your broth and now you start adding the different elements to it. And that's what makes it that fine, tasty soup of a good image. And so that's kind of how I go about it. And I try to have at least a good photo tip every single day that can help be developed throughout the course of the day on a trip.
So I want to go back to the histogram, and I realize that this would be way better explained if we were together in the tidal flats of Alaska photographing brown bears and we could actually see the histogram. But would you mind explaining in sort of podcast friendly terms, what are you looking at with the histogram?
Oh.
What data are you gleaning from it? What decisions are you making when you see that chart?
All right, I'm going to try to keep the more you go into detail on this, the more the trolls are going to come out. You realize that, right? So, I, seriously, I mean, it's amazing how people can fight over, the small technicalities when you start describing this. What I'm looking at in histogram, and let's just say, for a well exposed image. Now, let's leave out for right now, let's leave out high key and low key exposures and where we're going with that, which is all fine. I mean, there's technically whatever you want to do is going to be fine. But for me, and let's just say I'm a middle of the road photographer, I'll put that out there right now as far as, you know, not challenging exposure. Would look at it that way. I shoot raw, so it gives me some leeway to correct if I am off or on,
Yeah, so we're
which is
talking
one
about
of the
like
reasons.
a well-lit scene, like something
Yeah,
that's not
even
overly
lighting,
bright.
even lighting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not like, again, high key would be super artistic and very,
Uh-huh.
very bright, and they are beautiful at times. Low key, very, very dark and ominous and moody. So yeah, something kind of not extreme on either end is what you're going for.
Exactly. So, I'm I'm looking at it as a chance to I wanna see everything from the left-hand mark. I wanna see a graphic value of the exposure that represents everything from the shadow side on the left to highlights on the right. And so, if you were to photograph, we used to call it a Denali in Alaska. When you photograph, say, something a medium tone, 18% reflectance, it would kind of have this bell-shaped curve going right through it. And we'd say, "Oh, hey, I got a Denali." But not every scene is gonna be like that because the number of highlights versus shadows and midtones are gonna be different each place. I don't worry about what goes up over the top margin of the histogram because that's still all gonna be captured in there. It's just the histogram on the back of your camera can't really show that. And by the way, a good reminder to everybody that that histogram on the back of camera is a histogram for the JPEG of that particular image, not necessarily the raw. So you have a little bit of leeway on the right-hand side and the left-hand side. I'm still a firm believer, or I should say, I practice exposing to the right. I tend to, if I don't have a whole lot of highlights and I've got this blank space, on the histogram to the far right, I'll open up and increase my exposure till I move it over. I can always darken it down later, and I don't feel that I lose anything by doing that, but I'm still, capturing as much of that data as possible over on the highlight side, because I tend to like the way I can process that particular image and bring that into play. So,
And the basic gist, as I understand it, because I'll be frank, I have used the histogram. I went through a phase where I was really a fanboy over it, but it's not so much anymore. But if you have that curve in this histogram chart, what you're looking for is the bell curve, those high peaks, the top of the curve is where you're getting most of your data and most of your light, meaning it's representing more of the scene than others. So what you're trying to avoid is having those big spikes being abutted completely to the far right side or the far left side, because that means that there's too many highlights or too many dark points. So on the right side would be too many highlights, left side would be too many shadows and dark spots.
yeah, and that's fine as long as they don't really go over that margin on the left or on the right, because that's data that's lost. I like to use back in the day, even during film, I used to use the example that when you made an exposure, you're filling a cup. And if you filled it too much, it spilled out. And that was an overexposure. And that's data you're not going to get back into that file. If you if you've got all this stuff built up on the left and a little bit kind of centering out to the middle, then you go to say, I won't, let's not represent any brands here, but let's say we go to, I'll make it up, Starbusters, and you order a cup of coffee and they give you this cup of coffee and it's only about half full. You're like, hey, wait a minute, I'm getting gypped here. That's the same thing as if you're underexposing. You're not really filling that cup to the brim to where you get all that wonderful flavor, all in that case of a digital file, all that data in there that you can work with later. I'm a firm believer capture as much data in that file as possible and then, suss it out and work it, finesse it, add the secret sauce to it later.
Fantastic. Yeah, I do love blappuccinos at Starbusters. They're super tasty. Bumpkin spice
Yeah, oh yeah, there you
lattes.
go. Yeah, I love that season. Bumpkin season.
Yeah, the BSLs. Okay, so back to the questions.
Oh,
Um,
oh, that wasn't a
I
question?
Yeah. Okay, this is one that I always love asking. So you have had, of course, a very illustrious career, and folks in the audience, if you don't know Eric Rock, amazing guy, amazing photographer, just kind of the pinnacle of what you want to do if you are into travel, into nature and wildlife photography. What would the Eric of today tell the Eric just starting out?
Oh, that I I think back to when I was starting out. This profession really wasn't there. I mean, it was just, kicking off. I think about 45 years ago, it was just kicking off. So, I was still a young I was photographing then. What I would tell myself now? Hmm, that's a good question. I would say nothing more than what I've said before is, sticking with your passion. You might have to, take your knocks early on. When I started out, most of my, this not being here, I started out in wildlife biology, which there weren't a lot of wildlife biology jobs back then either. But I worked coming out of school the first time, I worked in a restaurant and I volunteered at a Carnegie Museum field campus as a naturalist. So I put in my time. Um, Back then, just starting out volunteer work, I would suggest, it's a good way to get your foot in the door, especially in wildlife biology. But I started out as a naturalist first because there wasn't really that many photo tours going on yet. And then eventually, as photo tours picked up, I saw it was a natural change for me to move into photography. So the only way I really got there was sticking with my two passions. The first one being nature and wildlife, spending as much time in the woods as possible. And the other one is, taking a camera with me. And if you travel with me, I usually tell people the story about how I came into photography. And that was early on. I was lucky there. So sticking with that, find your passion and, try not to be pulled away from it by, other career promises, unless that's the way you want to go. That's totally fine, but it's very easy to be distracted. I got distracted by social work for a few years because I had to make a living, and just the situation I was in. I took from that some skills that I use today working with people. So, um, if you're using your passion, I think you can find, no matter what you're doing, you can find a way to help make you better at what you want to do. So, no matter what that is, whether it's, photography, photo tour leading, or whatever, you may be distracted from what your passion is or your goals are at the time, but find ways to take tidbits out of that to lead you in that direction. Again, I'm not sure if that's the best answer, but yeah, I'm trying to fall back on the excuses. This really wasn't there when I was young.
Hey, no wrong answers. That's spoken by Eric himself. I appreciate that. Okay, so I want to talk and ask about photography as a conservation tool. So we're both conservation biologists by training and have a long background. We're very passionate about conservation, and I'll ask this with full transparency that I feel like I have not completely cracked this nut. Like it's a challenging question to what I'm essentially alluding to here, which is how does one use photography as a conservation tool? How do you or how could you or how could someone in the audience use their photography as something to support the conservation of nature?
I would say everything you do, as far as if you share images, whether it's talking to friends. I used to, when I worked in Colorado doing some field research down there, I used to do the annual slideshows for the community. And it was just the people coming into the library. And I loved that because I was sharing stories about nature and what I've been doing, where I was at, and what I learned. And it was a great experience for myself, and I hope other people got something out of it. So just share your photos. That's a great place to start. But I think the more you learn about what you're doing, and this goes for taking the photos, the more you learn about, the better photographer you're going to be. But the more you learn about your subject, is the more influence you're going to have when you share this stuff with people. That's kind of the ground level of what we're doing. After that, I'd have to say I don't really have a whole lot of experience. What I do mostly is in the field and an educator in the field, and that gives me an opportunity. For instance, let me give use an example, telling a story. Maybe I started working doing these macro workshops back east in Maine, and it's just an awesome opportunity to get together. There's usually at least five other photographers. We do these long weekend workshops together, and I picked up the idea of taking what I know from my youth was aquatic insects. Ever since I was a little squab, I loved aquatic insects. I found them a good way to really I found them an excellent way to get an idea what was going on in a stream or a lake or a pond by which different insects were there, understanding their life stages, how that came into play into healthy ecosystem. And so I figured, you know what? I'm going to add something different to this year's, and this was 2025, to this year's workshop. I'm going to figure out a way to, do underwater aquatic insect photography. So I went to the books, which nowadays is primarily the internet, for more up to date stuff, and started doing some research. And I found a way to make these little temporary um, aquariums that I could have sit down and have people photograph, mayflies, stoneflies, dragonfly nymphs, even some cool stuff like if you're Dobson fly, or what do we call those guys now? There's a couple of different names for Dobson fly, trout fly, or fish fly is another name for them. So all these really cool aquatic invertebrates and even small little crayfish, things like that, in a macro setting and kind of like a little studio. But I use that for an opportunity to talk to people about what a healthy ecosystem is and why these are all coming out of this little stream, why we're seeing those, how they make their living. Are they detritivores? Are they carnivores? Are they out there hunting? And so hopefully they took more from that experience than just photographing these cool little bugs. Because it really was. We had this stream laid out in front of us, and you could see how rich and everything was. But to actually get into a place where they were seeing the unseen. Maybe they saw one as a kid or something picking up rocks in a stream, but this is a chance for them to learn something about it. And for me, that was important for me to help share that with those people. And hopefully most people got something out of that, that it's a very intricate little world in each little stream and pond and lake that you get into.
I love that answer, and I haven't heard that explanation. I ask this question a lot, and that's a great one. It gets you to see the unseen. It gets you to appreciate truly the engineers of our world, these little ecosystem engineers, whether it's termites or leafcutter ants or aquatic insects. I mean, they are doing a lot more ecosystem services than most people realize. And so, yeah, like getting the actual act of photography to be part of the conservation and not just focusing on the product, like the ending photograph. So yeah, that's a fantastic answer. So I want to switch to gear, but one final question before this, and it's kind of a two-parter, but it has to do with editing and processing. And I'm wondering, editing is becoming such an important part of photography. What is your approach to editing? Do you spend a lot of time on the photographs? Do you have a couple sliders that you probably use with each and every photo, but not much more? Do you have any like special settings that you're like, oh, people don't know about this one, but it's really great? So I asked a lot there, but then the second part, which you can kind of bake into it, I'm just curious, like how would you describe your photo style? Like for me, I'm interested in kind of big, meaningful, sort of impactful, high contrast, saturated, not oversaturated, but very colorful kind of scenes. So again, to summarize that question, approach to editing, and also a little bit about what is your ending photo style, if you had to
Okay.
describe it.
Fair enough. No, it's good questions. I don't know if I have good answers, but they're good questions. Okay. I would say I'm a minimalist when it comes to editing. I use Photoshop. Photoshop has so much into it. And I've tried, I've worked with Lightroom, I've worked with Luminar, a lot of different softwares, and I keep coming back to simple. I remember I'm coming from a dark room as a student, as a kid, working in a dark room, whether it's working with color or whether working with black and white, and there are only some. There were certain things you could do to craft an image, and those things are still pretty much in Photoshop and Lightroom as well as everything else. But for some reason, I fall back on Photoshop, probably because that's what I learned on. But I do real simple things. I basically just go through the levels. I look at my shadows. They need to be lightened up? Usually not too much. Highlights. As long as I haven't pushed them out, I might try to recapture a little bit of highlight detail with the highlight or the white slider. Um, then from there, very few of my images need a little bit of contrast, but maybe if there's a contrasting, I'll adjust the contrast a little bit. If I'm working with black and white, here's where I'm a little bit different than most people. If I'm working with black and white, I love using the dehaze. It just really freaking pops things. And people, it's a hammer. I'll tell you right now, dehaze is like taking a hammer into Photoshop, right? But a little bit of it sometimes, especially in black and white, can really add some drama to the image. So I use that more so in black and white, but I usually don't touch too much in color. So and then from there, I might vibrance. I like vibrance, so I like a little bit of vibrance in there. If I'm not using vibrance, I'm probably touching the saturation a little bit, but that's not too much. And then if the image needs it, if I'm shooting low light and I need to, or I want to work some sharpness and take out some noise, usually use a little topaz and not too much. 20% sharpening is about as high as I go in most situations, and that seems to do it. I mean, it really works out well for me there. But I will tell you that I could probably do a lot better job processing. But I'm a here and now kind of guy. I grab the images I want to work with, work them up, get them into where they need to go, whether it's to the company for promotional stuff or to my trip report, get those out, and then I'm on to my next thing. Otherwise, things would back up so far, I would never get anything done. So I'm a high grader for sure in that regards. Now, that's kind of my yeah, that's kind of my technique for working images and my workflow. I could go more detail, but that would be boring. But let's talk about style because that's a more nebulous thing. I remember talking to my mentor about that, and I would say my mentor is very eclectic in his photography. He can shoot just about anything. When he doesn't do, he's a more of a documentary photographer, and but when he shoots wildlife, it's usually like, wow, that's a great wildlife shot that I haven't seen anybody do anything that way before. He's got a very good knack for that kind of thing. And so we talk about style off and on, and that's a very nebulous thing. My style is very eclectic also. I mean, again, what most people tend to see in my wildlife images or nature landscape type images that I post on my social. And I would say I'm pretty most for the most part, middle of the road. I don't challenge myself for that. I should do more. I do more in some occasions. For me, the images that mean more to me are the ones that are outside that middle of the row, shot, high. Sometimes it's high contrast, that high key or low key image. Sometimes it's a subject that extends far beyond the boundaries of the frame, so you're only getting a little bit of it, more abstract. Sometimes it's more blur. I love working with, long exposures, whether that's landscapes, cloudscapes, wildlife moving, the cheetah chase or the leopard hunt. All that stuff is cool. So I would say I'm kind of middle of the road in that regard. And sometimes I push myself, and I should probably do that. So I'm still developing my style. I don't know where that's going to end up, but I'm still developing it. Okay.
I love it. Never stop developing style. That's great. That's a good takeaway.
There are some people you can look back and say, hey, that looks like a Nick Brandt image, or that looks like so and so because they put that grunge filter in there, or which is totally cool. I'm totally fine with that. That's what I'm saying. When people make images, they should be very happy with what they're getting and going for what they want and being happy with it. So um, I'm happy right now, still exploring style.
I love it. Yeah, that's something I've always grappled with because my style's probably changed, a handful of times throughout the years, really kind of in response to and in parallel with the emerging technologies, whether that's editing technologies or just camera technologies. And I do often wonder, would I be better suited to stick with such a dominant, recognizable style so anybody seeing your image is like, oh yeah, that's one of his. Like I can just tell because of the way that the colors look or the highlights, the use of highlights. Haven't done that. It has its merits, and just
Hmm.
always keen to hear what other people think about that.
Yeah.
So, so you use full Photoshop? It's not Camera Raw or Lightroom. You just go straight into
Well,
Photoshop, or is it
it
Camera Raw?
it starts at camera raw and then
Okay,
goes
yeah,
into
yeah, yeah.
Photoshop. Yeah.
Got it, got it, got it. Yeah.
So
Yep,
so I
I'm the
drop.
same way. That is what I use. Lightroom, very, very similar, almost identical, but I've never liked the file management aspect of Lightroom. That's always been
Uh,
my Achilles heel.
Same here.
Yeah.
Same here.
Okay, let's get into gear. What are you shooting on, Eric? I'd like to take a quick break and thank one of the sponsors of our episode. Art Helper's mission is to create a brighter future for human artists in the world of kind of infinite AI content. Art Helper is no longer just a powerful tool set designed to assist artists in the distribution and promo of their work. It's now becoming a real time professional networking community for creators of human made art. It's an energizing, real time feed of artwork, discussion, critique, and art world news. It's a global human artist directory of sorts that art buyers can trust with curated galleries of real human made art. Most importantly, it's 100% free to join. You can navigate to arthelper.com and they'll guide you through the sign up process. If you want to go direct to the sign up page, you just hit /sign up after that Art Helper URL. But again, I'll put this in the show notes so you can navigate directly to it. I think it's this new, very, very fascinating, captivating, and really fun way to show, share, and learn about the art creating industry and community via arthelper.com.
I'm an well, I've shot just about everything over the my time frame from film to now. In fact, I could probably reach over here in the closet next to me and grab a couple of film cameras from medium format to old Canon film SLRs. But I've settled in. It's been about 10 years now. I've settled into shooting what was then Olympus, now OM system. And early on, they made with my connection with them and my shooting, they acknowledged my skill by making me an educator. And then later, when it became OM system, they moved me into their ambassador program. But I find that that camera system frees me up to be far more creative, far more productive. And honestly, the word that comes out of my mouth more so is fun. It's just been more fun. I mean, lighter gear, uh, you know, just the lens come back to it. The lenses are fantastic, and I'm a lens guy for sure. The bodies are awesome, and the incredible computational in-camera computational elements to it just add to it. But really, I go for Zuiko lenses. And I remember back teaching basic photography at university. students would come in with an OM camera from Olympus, and we would look at they were just using, like, their Nifty 50 from Zuiko to take photos. I remember putting them on the negatives on the light table and looking at 'em and saying, "Wow, this is just a really nice, contrasty, sharp image you got here." And consistently, it was Zuiko glass and their Zuiko lenses, and so they're still made and, still wonderful, and I'm still blown away by them. So,
What kind of lenses do you tend to prefer? Not to have you list every lens that you use,
I
but kind of favorites, your go-to, your defaults, most impressive, that sort of thing.
that's I love them all. They're like, I won't say children, but pretty damn close, okay? And, mm, and it's good my wife isn't here right now because if did sit here and list them off, she'd say, "When did you get that lens?" But actually, Melissa's also an OM shooter now as well, and she
Oh,
understands.
okay.
She's got a pretty good collection. I would say for wildlife, it falls on 2 primary lenses right now, and hands down, my favorite for wildlife, especially when you start talking birds, is the phenomenal 150 to 400 f4.5, and it's a
Hmm.
4.5 the whole way through. And on top of that, it's got a built-in 1.25 converter, weatherproof, one of the best weatherproofing in any equipment out there, both for the lens and the camera bodies for the pro level. And along with that, the image stabilization, it just blows everything away. And with a 150 to 400 on a something cropped as extreme as a micro four thirds, it's essentially a 300 to 800 millimeter zoom. And then you can add the 2.5 to make it up to 1000 millimeters, which
It is
is
an incredible lens.
hand holdable. It's in, if I'm, the only time I take a tripod on a tour now or a trip now or any type of photo shoot is if I'm doing night sky stuff, whether it be aurora borealis or anything that has to do with the night sky. So I hardly ever that's cuts down my weight quite a bit. So it kind of talks about the practicality of moving, traveling, dealing with weight restrictions, things like that. And then the lens that backs that up nowadays, and I was lucky enough to have a chance to test this lens out before it came out into the market by taking it to Africa this year, is the OM system 50 to 200 2.8. And it's a little bit it's about the size of a 70 to 200 2.8 in most full frame cameras, and but lighter, and image stabilization just as good. It might even be sharper than the 150 to 400, but brilliant, works well with both teleconverters added. Doesn't have a built-in teleconverter, which disappointed some, but you know what? It really makes it a very easy lens to back up and travel with. But I used it on Safari, and quite frankly, I could see me taking that and a 1.4 on Safari and be perfectly happy with that combination. Because you're looking at essentially the same perspective as a 1 to 400, 2.8, and a lighter weight, than most of the 1 to 400s or 1 to 500s, and much more compact, weatherproof, image stabilized, amazing. So those are my two go. I can't imagine doing any type of nature trip without both of those. There might be times where I choose to take one of them over the other, but it would be a mental wrestling match for me.
Yeah, that 50 to 200, which is again the equivalent of a 100 to 400 f2.8, it has had me drooling when I heard that that thing came out. I heard from someone, and I haven't yet researched this to know if it's true, but that because of the smaller sensor, the background separation of 2.8 is different than if
Yes.
you were to have like a 2.8 on a full frame camera. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. It's a subtle difference. If you're shooting, if you're really looking at it, it's essentially 2 stops of extra depth of field. It's the same aperture as far as the amount of light coming in for sure. So that's one that trips a lot of people up, and, it's a fallacy, but for the most part, yeah, you do get more depth of field, which in wildlife, in most cases, isn't a detriment. If somebody was really hardcore portrait shooter, things like that, they'll notice a difference. I don't notice a difference what I'm doing, and if you shoot macro, it's an extra bonus,
Mhm, mhm.
it really is. And, I've seen we don't wanna go down the avenue of macro too much here, but for the most part, for most people, they're not gonna notice that. I found, the difference is more important to separate as the distance from the subject to the background, and that comes into play in what we're talking about, and that's gonna be a more important factor.
Yeah, for those that haven't heard this before in my podcast, it's such an important point to make that I'm going to make it again here for the 12th time. Is we always we love that background blur. It's the subject background separation, the quality of that blur known as bokeh or bokeh. Tomato tomato. The trolls will come out for that one, has how it's
Yeah, yeah,
pronounced,
definitely.
but it's Bokeh. Um, you can have a shallow depth of field via that f2.8 or, even f4 is pretty darn shallow. But what makes the biggest difference is the ratio of you, the photographer, to your subject to the background. So three parts there, right? It's you and how close you are to your subject, and then how close your subject is to its background. And if you are much closer to your subject than your subject is to its background, you can shoot on f8 and it's going to be nicely blurred. Now, if your subject is very close to its background and you're far away, you can shoot on the shallowest depth of field, the f2.8, f2. Heck, we can go smaller, f1.4. It doesn't really exist in big telephotos, but nevertheless, it won't be blurred. So yeah, being able to use that brain power to find those spots versus being fixated on the small f number all the time is a really really important point. And that sometimes might be just as simple as you pivoting around your subject. Maybe there's a tree just behind the subject's left side and you just pivot a little bit. All of a sudden that tree moves out of the way. So now the background is another 50 yards further and then beautiful creamy blur in the background. So I just wanted to make that point because it's a really important one that I've found over the years of choosing your background, pivoting, maximizing that distance. It makes a huge difference.
That's very
So
good fieldcraft. Very good.
yes,
What we were talking about
yeah.
earlier, fieldcraft.
Oh, yeah, nice, nice, nice. Um, okay, so one of the final questions here, what is a piece of gear for your nature photography that is not having to do with cameras or lenses that is surprisingly helpful that people might not think about? And I'll seed the question a little bit here just to give you an example in a moment to think about it, but I've had answers of like a little piece of electrical tape to put on their lens when they want to lock focus, but they're in manual for like night photography. I won't get
Mhm.
into the explanation. You'll just have to listen to the Colby episode for that. Or
Sounds
it
like
might.
Aurora Borealis, if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And then Eddie Savage, his is a towel. He brings a towel because he's photographing in British Columbia, very wet environments, like a little microfiber towel. Is there anything along those lines that Eric Rock loves to bring on trips that is kind of a next level game changer for photography that's not specifically photo gear related?
You know what made a big difference for me, especially in cold, wet wetter climates, especially guiding in the Arctic, Alaska doing the Alaska trips, waterproof socks. It's silly, but, they weigh so little. You can wear your hiking shoes, you're comfortable, you're steady, you're stable pretty much the whole time. You don't have to worry about carrying boots or getting into boots. So I know how much, most people hate getting into boots, but waterproof socks can make a big difference, and there's some good ones out there nowadays. And I would say if you're doing winter stuff in Yellowstone, Arctic, or Antarctic, electric socks. I mean, they've come a long way now too. It's amazing. You recharge them. You're not flipping batteries out and putting new ones in. You're just recharging when you get back. And honestly, when I do winter in Yellowstone, actually, I got to remember. I'm heading to Alaska next. I got to remember to pull them out because I'm heading to Alaska for a couple February trips. I better pull those out before I forget them. So socks are important. I feel like I'm in an episode. I feel like I'm in what was a movie. Forrest Gump. They're talking about the importance of socks, but
Yeah.
very important in the field.
He's a sock guy. Yeah, Electric
Exactly.
Socks. That's a great band name if anybody needs to
Oh,
take that
ooh, I
further,
like that.
right? The Electric Socks. The electric socks and the wading boots. Okay, fantastic. So we've come to the final question. This is an easy one. Eric, this has been fantastic. People are definitely going to want to hear and learn and see more of you, of your work. Where do people find you?
Oh, they can find me on Instagram at Eric S. Rock. Eric, ERICSROCK. No silent Q's or anything in there, just Eric S. Rock. And then my website, Eric Rock Photography, you can find it by Googling that. I would say I'm a lot better, a lot more updated on Instagram. That's a nice thing about Instagram. It's a really updatable gallery compared to a website, although a lot of good stuff on my website as well. Okay. And that'll also lead you, if you're on my website, you can check out tours, things like that from there. There's a drop down. You can look at where I'm going when for the next year and a half. When 2 years should be updated here soon.
Fantastic, Eric. Well, gosh, what a pleasure. It's uh
Always.
it's been a long time coming, and thanks so much for making the time today. Thanks so much for sharing the wisdom, and yeah, really appreciate your time.
I appreciate the time with you as well. Always good to spend some time with Court.
All right. Folks, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Eric, just a pleasure to connect with. I learned a lot. I'm sure you did as well. I wanted to tune you into a couple extra bits of, well, resources, things you can navigate to learn more about photography, learn more about guiding, even in the world of conservation, things like we touched on in the episode. First up, I wanted to point you to my YouTube channel where I have editing tutorials. I have this podcast also available on YouTube. That's just youtube.com/at Court Whalen. So it's just YouTube, and then there's a little slash with the at symbol in Court Whalen. That's COURTWHELAN. I will put this in the show notes. And the last plug I wanted to mention is for a new course I'm actually designing with my buddy Colby Brockvist. This is a conservation communication course for guides. I know not all of you are nature guides out there, but if I do have some in the audience, this is an incredible new tool that we've designed specifically for nature guides around the world to help level up their communication of conservation topics. If you're interested in learning more about this, it's a very, very affordable all online course that you can download and have with you forever. And over the course of an hour or two, you can learn some of the most cutting edge and time honored ways to talk about conservation to your guests to help empower individuals to influence the influencers of our world, as I often like to say. That's just waypointguideacademy.com. Once again, waypointguideacademy.com. And I'm really proud to have this conservation course with my buddy Colby out there live and ready for folks to download, listen to, and learn from. So once again, thanks so much for joining and looking forward to the next time.